And this is Brother Saad in the studio here in London. It's been raining today, or it started raining this evening, um, a little bit heavy. And with me tonight, I've got Brother Rainer, and hopefully soon Brother Gregory will be joining us too. Brother Rainer, please tell us where you are and how's the weather where you are.
I'm in Germany, Münster, and the weather has become warmer again, unfortunately. So it's kind of wet outside and dark.
Dark, same.
And
Yes. So same as here, really. Okay. Dear listeners, as always, the aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. And we have a topic, as always, a new topic every week. The topic for tonight is Christmas spirit. Christmas Day is only 7 days away now, and we thought we should join in the mood. And so that's the topic for tonight. You can join us with any questions or comments. The number to contact us with your comments or questions, the number is 079 444 313 66. You can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And if you're outside of UK, it is 0044 79 444 313 66. So I'm going to first of all begin with what is the Grail message? The Grail message in the light of truth by Abrushin is a spiritual knowledge of life. It offers an explanation of the world, a picture of creation on the basis of natural laws. Its lectures contain valuable basic elements as a help in life, for through the knowledge mediated, the reader is again brought closer to life and led back to God. The Grail message deals with important fundamental questions of life by explaining in a clear and logical way the automatic working of the laws of nature, the whole weaving of creation, allowing every process to be recognized and thereby the purpose of our whole life. It is directed at the individual and speaks to the innate experiences of the human being, their strengths and weaknesses. Thus, every reader has the opportunity to discover, through the intuitive perception, if what is stated is the truth. Combining with matter-of-fact reasoning, a complete world picture arises, where there is no separation between the visible world and the great world beyond the five senses, nor any separation between scientific and religious striving for knowledge. I'd like to give you a couple of quotes from the author of the Grail message, Abrushin. The hearer and reader of my lectures should always work within himself, keenly probing and building bridges from one lecture to the other, as well as out into the great and small world happenings. Only then will he be able to understand the Grail message and find that it gradually shapes itself into one complete whole, without leaving any gaps. Again and again, in all the happenings, the reader will come back to the basic features. He can explain everything without having to change even one single sentence. The word of the Grail message lives, so that it permits only those people who really carry the honest desire in their souls to find abundantly. All else is automatically rejected by it. For the arrogant and those who seek superficially, the message will remain the book with 7 seals. And I'd like to give you one more quote from the author, Abrushin. I wish to fill the gaps which have so far always remained unanswered in the souls of men, and which never leave any serious thinker in peace, if he earnestly seeks for the truth. So dear listeners, I just want to remind you again, the topic for tonight is Christmas spirit. And obviously December is the start of the Christmas season. And I'm sure you have noticed that in the shops and in the streets with decorations and all the things people are talking about in the news and so on. So, but of course, really, we know it's bigger than what we see in the streets and all these everyday discussions. And it's the spiritual aspect That's what's behind it. But it seems we seem to focus on the earthly things. So that's what I want to also look at here, as well as the spiritual aspect. Now, okay. Brother Ryan, if I can ask you the first question, since Brother Gregory is still not around yet. Why should people celebrate Christmas? That's to, yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to celebrate, I mean, the question is really quite difficult. People are really celebrating Christmas,
Yes.
in their own ways, and it's a huge festive season with where family values are put to being at home, and pictures of snowy landscapes with sledges and reindeers. Those romantic pictures, well, of the 19th century, of the past, when the winters were still cold and freezing, and you gathered with the family round the fire, and you were back home around that fireplace. And there was a Christmas tree, and presents were given. And of course, at that time, also it had a much stronger spiritual content than it has today. And and people were still aware that that it really was a holy night, the night when Jesus, or in the morning after that holy night, when Jesus was born, and that is really Christmas, the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. But to really be able to celebrate it as it should be celebrated, you must first be convinced, or you must first know something about Jesus. You must see the greatness of that happening, and that sense, that understanding of the greatness of that happening, that has been meanwhile completely lost. And we have become much more materialist meanwhile, and, well, even outright hostile to God. And so that notion that it's really the holy night, the night after which Jesus was born in the morning, that is almost not mentioned anymore. But in the olden time, it was mentioned quite a bit. Since I'm talking and Brother Greg is not here,
Yes.
can I read just something of a poem out of the 19th century about Christmas, which I've looked up? I tell you afterwards by whom it is, but
Okay.
and that's in fact one of the few, and it is about it's called Music on Christmas Morning. It's written by a very young woman, and at the time, I do not know exactly when it was written, but about 1820 or so, and it describes, she had a very hard life, and it describes some music she hears, and which assuages her grief and conquers the pain. And it's the music she hears on Christmas morning, a famous song, and but it's still the darkness, and she's not away, but she describes then the emotions she's got, that this is the that something like this happened, this incredible happening, that Jesus was born to illuminate the human beings and to lead them into salvation again. And the sense that Jesus was the salvation of everybody, that was incredibly alive at that time. So the poem is called Music on Christmas Morning. There's a noise, Brother Saad.
Yes, I believe Brother Gregory has just joined us, but I think you should carry on.
Yeah.
Is it still you're hearing the sound, the noise?
Yeah. Still hearing it.
Okay. I must admit I can't hear anything on this. Just a little, very tiny thing. Just carry on because it's fine from my side.
Yeah. Okay. Music on Christmas morning. Music I love, but never strain could kindle raptures so divine. I think I stop here because this is really disturbing me, this
really?
noise.
Okay.
Is that really Brother Greg now coming? Or?
Yes. Let me just welcome Brother Gregory. And
yes.
Brother Gregory, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hello. I'm all right.
Good. Just tell us where you are and how is the weather where you are?
Of course, just like London,
yes.
I'm in Brussels.
Right.
And it's been cool, but it's okay.
Okay, but not raining. Is it raining?
No, not raining yet.
Okay, we're having rain here. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to, if I ask you just to be on mute for a moment while I ask Brother Rainer to continue with the poem he would like to read, and then hopefully there's a slight little background sound, and hopefully that will go now. Go ahead, Brother Rainer, with the poem.
Okay, it's called Music on Christmas Morning.
Yeah.
And it's just about the night before, in the holy night. And the first thing is, music I love, but never strain could kindle raptures so divine, so grief assuage, so conquer pain, and rouse this pensive heart of mine, as that we hear on Christmas morn, upon the wintry breezes borne. Through darkness still her empire keep, though darkness still her empire keep, because it's night, and hours must pass ere morning break, from troubled dreams or slumber steep, that music kindly bids us wake. It calls us with an angel's voice to wake and worship and rejoice, to greet with joy the glorious morn, which angels welcomed long ago, when our redeeming Lord was born, to bring the light of heaven below, the powers of darkness to dispel, and rescue earth from death and hell. So I just stop there. This is this one thing which is really important to understand, because she has an inkling what Jesus Christ was about, and what joy it was that he was incarnated on earth on that holy night. So it's to greet with joy the glorious morn, which angels welcomed long ago. That was at the time Christ was born, where actually angels welcomed him, and the shepherds heard him. When our redeeming Lord was born, to bring the light of heaven below, the powers of darkness to dispel, and rescue earth from death and hell. My raptured spirit soars on high. I seem to hear those songs again resounding through the open sky, that kindled such divine delight in those who watched their flocks by night. Those who watched their flocks by night, these were the shepherds, and they really could see the angels, the heralds of that great happening happening. With them, that is, with them I celebrate his birth. Glory to God in highest heaven. God will to men, and peace on earth. To us, Savior, King is given, our God is come to claim his own. and Satan's power is overthrown. I read that again, I made some mistakes. With them I celebrate his birth. Glory to God in highest heaven, goodwill to men, and peace on earth. To us a Savior, King is given. Our God is come to claim his own, and Satan's power is overthrown. And I stop here because one can see that this young woman who wrote that poem about 200 years ago, there are really all the things. All this love to God is in it. Is glory to God in highest heaven, goodwill to men, and peace on earth. To us a Savior, King is given. That was our big chance, humanity's big chance, to establish peace on earth if we had followed him, and goodwill to men. And of course, the Hallelujah, which means glory to God, which the angel choir sang at this holy night. And it's this concept of the holy night which has disappeared now 200 years from then completely. And without that concept, that understanding what this holy night is about and why it is so holy and what it is, what its importance for humanity is, without that knowledge, one cannot celebrate Christmas as it should be celebrated. So I pass it back to my brothers.
Thank you for that, Brother Rainer. I mean, just from the words, you can very clearly hear that, how great and beautiful is this occasion. And as you said, it really isn't how we do it today. Almost, you could probably only hear this in a church, in some place like that. Definitely in the, let's say, TV and elsewhere, where the majority of human beings you hear. That is definitely not what they are celebrating. It's more about like families getting together and being festive. That's basically what, festive meaning eating in that way,
Yeah.
not
Yes.
a party. Let's say like a party more than anything else, so yes. Just want to ask if Brother Gregory would like to say anything. What we were listening there.
Well, thanks. I will want to read a passage briefly, but before reading that passage, one must make a comment that the topic of today is the spirit of Christmas. Since the topic is the spirit of Christmas, and many know that Christ came for a spiritual mission. Therefore, Christmas, the way it's supposed to be seen, must be looked at from a spiritual standpoint. The song which was everywhere, or is still everywhere, when it is said that through Christmas, man may now live forever, is very pertinent. Therefore, I will just read a passage from the Walk in the Light of Truth, the Grail Message, and from the lecture, The Redeemer. So one can have a background why Christ came, and at least appreciate the efforts, the gift that was presented for humanity to acquire spiritual knowledge or see for themselves through observing or keeping the activities that Christ has put forward, such that they may then mature enough to be able to ascend. At the same time, it must be borne in mind that man has come to the earth in order to experience and mature spiritually. It is not meant for all the, in quotes, enjoyment and time wasting and all the vain things which has been attached to the holy festival of Christmas. For it was a massive, a gigantic exercise and gift that the Creator granted creation such that many a person may open their senses spiritually. Now I will read it from the Redeemer. And now to turn to the great work of redemption itself. Mankind was erring in spiritual darkness. They had created this themselves by subjecting themselves more and more to the intellect, which they had so assiduously cultivated. In so doing, they limited their perspective ability more and more until, like their brain, they became unconditionally bound to space and time, and could no longer grasp the way to what is infinite and eternal. Thus, they became completely earthbound, limited to space and time. All connection with the light, with purity, with the spiritual, was cut off thereby. The volition of man was only capable of directing itself to earthly things, with the exception of a few who, as prophets, did not have the power to penetrate and to make a free path to the light. This situation opened all the gates to evil. Darkness welled up and flooded the earth, bringing disaster. This could only have one end: spiritual death, the most terrible fate to befall mankind. The guilt for all this misery lay upon mankind. They brought it upon themselves by voluntarily choosing this course. They had wanted it to be so, and cultivated it. In their utter blindness, they were even proud of their achievement, without recognizing the terrible consequences arising from their limited understanding, which they so painstakingly forced upon themselves. To open a path to the light from a humanity in such a state was impossible. The self-imposed limitation was already too great. If there was still to be any possibility of salvation, help must come from the light. Otherwise, the downfall of man into darkness was inevitable. Darkness itself, through its impurity, has a greater density, which brings about a heaviness. Because of this heaviness, darkness cannot of itself rise above a certain weight level, unless from the other side some attracting power comes to its aid. Light, however, possesses a lightness corresponding to its purity, which makes it impossible for the light to descend to the level of darkness. Thus, there is an unbridgeable gulf between both paths, in the middle of which stands man of this earth. I will stop there. This is a prelude. Christ had to come to form that bridge. Had he not come, then mankind would have perished in spiritual darkness. Or, let me not use the word spiritual darkness, would have perished in ignorance and in the darkness. Therefore, his coming should be well appreciated, not with eating and drinking, but in sober reflection of the importance of why he had come. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brother Gregory. I want to ask you some more things, but first of all, I'd just like to let the listeners know you're listening to Bless Radio. It's the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abdrushin. And the topic we're discussing tonight is Christmas spirit, or the spirit of Christmas. Christmas Day is only a week away now. And thank you, Brother Gregory, for reading that passage from the lecture Redeemer, from the Grail message. It brings up so many points in my head, actually. And maybe I'm going to ask Brother Reiner to address a few of them and then go back to you as well. So, Brother Reiner, in that passage, we know that, or what we hear there is that there's basically the spirit, our human beings, as human beings, we know we are spirit, and yet we also have an intellect which seems to cut us off from our spirit, or at least the way we've been using that intellect has cut us off from our spirit. And Jesus, it's clearly said in that passage that Jesus had to come to bring us out of that darkness that we have found ourselves in. And what I wanted to ask you, it seems today that it's not much dissimilar even now, even though Jesus came, and obviously that was a big thing that he came, and he did, well, let me say, he brought love, and that is clearly still evident in humanity, that we have that, we show love maybe in terms of giving help to other people in charity or our fellow human beings and so on. That is there, but somehow the intellect still seems to be so dominant that, just as you started when we started the earlier part of the show, when we celebrate Christmas, it's still, the way we celebrate is still somehow an earthly basis rather than a spiritual basis, which is what it's meant to be, you know. So my question to you, Brother Reiner, is, would you say the state of affairs today, spiritually speaking, is it much different than at the time of when Jesus came? Because it seems to me we haven't really progressed.
Well, Brother Saad, I think you're quite right there. We haven't really progressed, at least not in the upward direction. We surely have progressed in the downward direction, and our understanding of spiritual things has pretty much shrunk to nothing, and our capabilities to perceive intuitively, to have this emotional sensitivity to experience something like holiness or purity, what it means, that of course we have completely lost, or the majority of humanity has completely lost. We cannot understand those notions anymore, and what that is. And of course at the time Jesus was absolutely necessary, as the as Brother Greg told you. He was the necessary bridge. We needed that knowledge to come from above to help us out of the confusion, or humanity needed it because it had lost its way at the time, 2,000 years ago. And already then the basic attitude of humanity was hostile towards the light, and that was exemplified by that terrible deed of murdering Jesus. and well, eliminating him. The darkness hated him, and the worldly powers and the clergy at the time hated him because they were afraid of him, and they feared, from this superior knowledge he gave, they feared that their authority would be decreased and they would lose a hold on the crowds following them, and so which resulted eventually in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Now, this happening, it is not, as I've read recently about someone talking about Abdrusheen, Jesus has not failed in his mission. He did exactly what he had to do. He fulfilled the will of his Father, and he brought that knowledge, and he brought all the things humanity needed at the time to find the way out of the confusion. And but we must always keep in mind, as the Grail message explains, humanity had then a free will, it has now a free will, it has all the time. The human being, the human spirit, possesses free will, and he can decide against the light or for the light. It decided against the light at the time of Jesus and crucified him. And so at a very young age, this terrible tragedy happened, that the only one who could save us from destruction and make us find back our way to the light was murdered. And unfortunately, that was not enough. What happened then also, there were of course many things Jesus said, and one of the sayings one always connects with Jesus is this one saying, you must become like children. And this wonderful saying, which is in a way mysterious to the intellectual man, because the intellectual man thinks himself very proud and knows all. This is this childlikeness, this purity a child possesses, and being able to perceive that wonder again, that wonder of Jesus, of the light, of the holiness of God, which was with us at the time. God was actually walking among men at the time, and also to experience that wonder of the holy night, that such a happening was taking place. Actually, some incredible thing happened, that God's Son, I call him now God's Son, was walking on earth, and we could have had everything from him. He could have helped us if we had asked and welcomed him. We would have had everything, and we would have had paradise on earth if we would have followed him. But we decided to nail him to the cross, and that free will is the same today, and people can again decide to turn against God, and they obviously do. And today it is even much harder, although one feels already the desperation behind it, because the darkness, of course, and knows that it cannot win against the light, because everything is from the light. The light is the only energy, and the dark powers are just powers which also take the power from the light, but direct it in a wrong way, direct it in a way against the laws of creation. So, Brother Saad, I think I've forgotten the initial
Yes.
question now.
Yes.
Can you just remind
Yes.
me,
Well,
please?
what was I? Well, basically, I was saying that um,
Oh,
this, the
I remember now. Things
yes,
have not become better,
yes, it's the same
and
thing in a way.
since then, and this is because the human beings had a free will and always will have a free will at the time, and they did not absorb his message and tried to live according to his message. And that is why nothing has happened. It's not the fault of Jesus Christ. One has to state that very clearly. It is the fault of humanity.
Thank you for that. I want to go back to Brother Gregory again to that passage about the that you read from the lecture Redeemer from the Grail message. And that's focusing on the word Redeemer itself, because many, you could say, Christians believe that Christ being the Redeemer is in the sense that he by dying he could take away the sins that we had. I know Brother Ryan has already said that that was actually a murder when he was crucified, not actually a sacrifice as some people might think. But then what I want to ask you on that is, so how is Jesus a redeemer if it is not through his death that what the Christians think saves them? Because they think by believing in him that his kind came and telling us, basically sacrificing himself, only then can our sins be taken away. So what is meant?
It is well said that by their works we shall know them. It wasn't said by their beliefs. By their works means the deeds. The deeds physically that are exhibited here on earth. The deeds which have been formed through brain substances. The deeds ethereally. The deeds in the world of matter. The deeds in the animistic, and the deeds in the spiritual. If there are no deeds, there is no work. And therefore, it must be concluded that any man who believes and doesn't do anything cannot move anywhere, because that is tantamount to spiritual indolence. There is no need dying for some other person so that they will be saved. The law is very clear. Thou shalt not kill. That being the case, it is not expected that he himself, who put such a law in creation, will turn round and send his inborn son to be murdered like a criminal. Therefore, their interpretation that after crucifying him and subjecting him to the most terrible crime, to a terrible pain, they should know that does not remove any of their iniquities or sins. Only through their personal efforts to do that which is in accordance with the will of the Almighty, the will through which each individual came into existence, the will through which each individual receives sustenance from the Almighty. It therefore means that unless we follow this path, which path Christ made very clear through his examples, through his deeds, that is the road to salvation. Otherwise, it is the road to the darkness, to ignorance, to stupidity, and it will not lead the human spirit to maturity so that it will ascend in time before we have the closure, which closure is only a result of the world of matter returning to its primeval state. It is expected that the human spirit should be matured enough to have left the world of matter and ascend such that it will arrive in its home as a self-conscious, matured human spirit. That was why Christ came.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. I mean, this is exactly, you can say, the opposite of what the Christians believe, or when they follow their teaching, that's what they're brought up with. So that obviously is a complete opposite what we are saying now. And so I want to say then, so the mission of Christ is definitely not to die for us as people think, but to bring us salvation. And how would you say that he brings us that salvation? That's to Brother Gregory.
It's very well known from his teachings, so, which means whatever a soul or a person has sown, that is what he or she must reap. It therefore means if one has done the best to sow goodness in accordance with the living will through which they came into existence, it is goodness they themselves will reap subsequently in their journey towards maturity. Therefore, one needs to examine the works of Christ very clearly through the structures that he put in place when he was asked, "And who is my neighbor?" And he gave a beautiful example of what a neighbor is, which basically is more like the attraction of those that have similar concepts, or what is now referred to as the attraction of homogeneous species, which generally may also be referred to as resonance. Whoever resonates with you, be it in joy or sorrow, whenever you take the sorrows of others to be your own and resonate with them and do the best you can for them, those are your neighbors. In turn, there are many in a chain that streams from paradise, where we already have the matured human spirits. Through that chain, they radiate in their activities to those below them, and those radiations get to us here on earth. And if we continue in that particular direction, we're able to mediate that which we have received. That is the purpose. And Christ, in his activities, showed us very clearly how this should be. However, he did not force anyone, because the human free will is there. To be or not to be has never been the question. It's how to be. And how to be, he himself set that example.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. Brother Ryan, I want to sort of now focus onto the earthly celebrations that people do and see, because we know how it's supposed to be spiritually, what is meant. Let's say we now know the meaning of what is the spirit of Christmas. And then I want to see what people are doing currently and see, because certain traditions have formed over centuries, and I just in a way want to explore how they came about. And I know they're a bit they're not celebrated in the spirit as they should be, but I think they still have some spiritual meaning behind them. So for example, I want to think about I'm just going to check something before I say something like this. Okay, so on the 21st of December is the winter solstice, and in Britain there were these Druid people who used to live here before the Romans came around, or the Celtics is another, those people used to be there, and they used to celebrate that festival. And then let's say Christians came over at some point, and they wanted to sort of, I guess, convert the people who are or use those traditional celebrations to combine it with the Christian celebration. And so, for example, as you know, winter solstice is the shortest day of the year, and after that, 21st of December, it starts becoming longer day of the year. So that solstice was meant to celebrate the rebirth of the sun. I mean the sun, S-U-N, sun, our sun of the solar system. And then the Christians somehow turned that to be the birth of the Son of God, Jesus, and in a similar way. So basically they adopted, for example, the Druids used to use holly as a symbol of hospitality, and they used to say the fairies would seek shelter in the cold in the holly, and sort of things like that, an evergreen, basically trees. And also they used to have this tradition of let me see, this Yule log, which is basically lighting candles, and which give light to strangers, sort of helping people. That's the thing. And this was now adopted by the Christians to welcome Mary and Joseph. So what I want to really ask you is, these two things seem to be completely unrelated, and yet they were sort of adopted. Do you think that was really a correct thing that should be done, or it's just people just trying to almost, I don't want to use the word mislead, but it's just like trying to put people together, join people together, not ignoring really what the real thing is. So because it's a tradition now, all these things are traditions now, we've just taken on, and it's just considered to be part of Christmas. And the origin of that, I would say most of the people wouldn't have a clue now.
Well, unfortunately, I do not know a lot about the Druids. So, and I think no one knows really what they celebrated in Stonehenge, and there are similar things everywhere. In France, there are similar things where calendar days where they determine the shortest day or the longest day of the year and things like this. And but definitely those Druids and the Germanic tribes, they knew a lot about what in past times has been called the gods. And in the Grail message, it's explained what they are, those beings of nature, the beings working in nature. And it is a wrong conception to think there is nothing around us. Everything, there is so much life around us where we have cut us off from. And those Druids and the Germanic tribes and the Celts, of course, they had a huge knowledge about those deities. They're called deities, and they knew about Zeus, or they had different names in the German gods had different names, but Donau means the thundering god, which is the same as Zeus, and there were temples of Donau. Unfortunately, they have never written something down, but the Grail message tells us those are not fictions, those are not myths. They are actually there, and that's the wonderful thing. And we have lost the connection with those beings. And that's why also those Germanic tribes, for example, they put up huge resistance to the Christian missionaries at the time, because they deprived them of their gods, the gods which they were in daily contact with. And some of those gods have survived in all kinds of customs. Like in Germany, there are thousands of customs, like the burning fires, and like you mentioned, some burning fires at certain times, fire wheels, and celebrating the solstice, the shortest day of the year, and lots of other such festivals, which then under Christianity has been relegated to the realm even of witchcraft. But often those things, especially working with the healing powers of nature and knowing those animistic beings, those elves, which showed the women at the time to find the right herbs and to find the healing powers you find in nature. And those women acknowledged that day, even when Christianity was there in the middle medieval ages, about 1500, 1400, and those women were regarded then with suspicion by the church, and were then persecuted. And part of the persecution is really that they still went back to that old knowledge, and that they still possess this contact with the nature beings. And today we have lost it, like so many things. We're really quite poor. We are all alone in the universe. We think we are all alone, and actually we are quite surrounded by the most magical things, and by flower elves, and by water spirits, and millions of other things we cannot see anymore. And they are there. And of course, those customs, they were absorbed under all kinds of names, and often the real reason for those customs has been lost, like the mistletoe. I do not know. It has just been absorbed. I do not know what it means anymore. And some customs have been newly established, like the Christmas tree. That's a very new invention, or a new habit, let us say. That I think that's just the 19th century that the Christmas tree was introduced. So that's not a Celtic myth. But yes, they were absorbed, like it happens all the time. The traditions are absorbed into newer creeds, and they survive there. And it would be, of course, much better if we started knowing again about what these myths are about and what they mean, and if we could get in contact with those nature beings, and we would be in a much better state. And so those nature beings are not to be dismissed and should never have been thrown out. These were really, unfortunately, the missionaries, and the church was not too knowledgeable about those things. And today, even no one believes anymore in these beings. But this is a terrible impoverishment. It's not something to be proud of, to be blind to what actually exists around us. And so that's how we have to live with it. And we have lots of customs and lots of things we do not know where they come from. We do not know exactly what the meaning is. The Germanic tribes and the Celts never wrote down anything, so we cannot read anything. So we, scientists or historians, archaeologists, they have to to kind of figure it out, and there's lots of conjecture and very little knowledge. And so I do not know where those customs come exactly what they meant, but definitely those customs are there, and sometimes they have a very good origin, and it would be wonderful if we knew exactly the meaning, but I'm afraid, unfortunately, no one knows. So I pass it back to you, Brother Saad.
Thank you for that, Brother Rainer. Yes, I mean, if somebody was listening and who didn't know, had the knowledge of the Grail message, they will think, talking about fairies, we must be we must have lost our mind, because nobody can take that seriously anymore. It's like, they call it fairy stories, like not real. You must be dreaming or something. Your mind might have gone. But of course
they think we live in a fairyland. In fact, we actually are living in a fairyland, and they are everywhere. And there are many people who still can see them nowadays, and they write books. I mean, I recently, a year ago or 2 years ago, I read one about an Austrian couple, and they make workshops, and they see actually those water spirits and water fairies, and it's quite magical. And if you have the Grail message and you know about them, you can explain very easily what they see, and what those two people who see those things, and they paint them also, what they wonder about. For example, because in the finer planes, speaking happens in a completely different way. You see almost what the other talks to you in an image before you. And so that woman was once walking on the side of a little river in the mountains, and she was thinking about the fair she saw in another valley, and thought something why the other fairies in this other valley were so much happier than those fairies here, which were in a river or in a brook where they had diverted the water from, so there was very little water. So they had a hard time, those water beings, those water nymphs. They were nymphs, in fact, those water nymphs. And the fairy said something, and she did not realize this thinking is the same thing as talking, because you do not have to talk physically on that finer plane. And so the fairy said, "Oh, you said this and this and this," and then she said, "No, I was not saying that. I was perhaps thinking that." And she could not see that there's a difference, that there's no difference for the fairies on a finer plane, because that what you on that finer plane, the words, you do not need any more air vibrations to communicate. You can see everything taking on shape immediately. Well, in any case, it's not like this that all the people are cut off from seeing those things. There are still people seeing those things, and anyone who is interested can look around. There are books around, and there are specialist bookshops, which of course are niche bookshops, which have books about such about people seeing fairies. And it's very fascinating, and it's definitely much nicer and much more exciting to live in a fairyland than to live in the somber world of the intellect, where there's actually nothing but traffic jams and not much anymore to look forward to, and just a host of problems which threatens and actually seems to overwhelm all humanity. And yes, so back to you, Brother Saad.
Thank you for that. It's definitely interesting topic. So, dear listeners, you're listening to the Tuesday night spiritual discussion program on Blessed Radio. The aim of the show is to introduce you to the spiritual knowledge in the light of truth, the Grail message by Abrushin. And the topic for discussion tonight, since Christmas Day is only a week away, is the spirit of Christmas, or Christmas spirit. And we'd love you to join us with any question or comments. You can contact us in this UK number is call, text or use WhatsApp. It's 079 444 31366. And if you're outside of UK, it is 00447944431366. Again, you can call, text, or use WhatsApp. And we are broadcasting obviously on our website, which is blessedradio.org. You can also listen to us on YouTube, which is go to youtube.com and then search for Bless Radio 1 and type after that live stream, and that's a live broadcast there. And then if you want to listen to our recording after the show, which is finishing at 8 p.m. at 10 minutes after the show, you can go again to youtube.com, just type in Bless Radio 1, and then after that search for Bro Saad, that's BRO Saad SAAD, and the topic of tonight's show is Christmas spirit. And also you can hear some old shows as well if you like. So yes, now I'm going to go to Brother Gregory next. I want to talk about telling the story of Christmas to children. Nativity plays they do in the churches and in the schools, and I just want to ask you, Brother Gregory, what do you think about that? Is that a good way for children to be introduced to the story of Christmas, and maybe so saying following the discussion we've already had so far, do you think something can be put in there so that people really get the spirit of Christmas in it, rather than just a story where somebody's giving gifts? People are bringing gifts. Three kings are coming to give gifts to Jesus, and and then the children are expecting to have gifts from their parents. What I want for Christmas is a bike and something like this and thing. So how can we use, basically, first of all, it is good to have this story, and how can we make it in a spiritual way that the message of Christmas is actually, people get that message?
Well, it is a good tradition to tell stories. It is the import of these stories that counts. It should be well known that the so-called three wise men were the most stupid men that ever lived, because they completely failed in the calling that had been granted them. They themselves, who were supposed to protect the child, knowing fully well the turbulence of earth life, they were supposed to have protected this child, but they dropped their goods, which one may call worthless. And what do we find today? In a similar manner, many just drop their gifts in a worthless manner, without any inner longing tied to it. So the same error that occurred at that time is being repeated, and therefore no progress. It is not the physical gift that you drop that counts, but the concern and the love that you show, the protection that you show through your activities, the protection will swing unconditionally in the will of the Almighty. That is what is expected. Something has to come from the Spirit. Of course, stones, gold, and diamond do not arise from the Spirit. These are physical things, and they still remain physical things. Therefore, if parents or friends or whoever wishes to celebrate Christmas, if there is nothing of the Spirit involved, then it is in vain and all is wasted. Christmas has always remained spiritual and must remain spiritual. That which is spiritual is very different. That which is spiritual helps man to mature through experiences, and that comes in simplicity. And that was why Christ said, become like little children. Little children who expect to be protected. Little children who open themselves are not filled with guile, which the elders have cultivated. Therefore, these gifts are utterly useless with reference to that which is spiritual. The only time the gifts will be useful is when they swing unconditionally in spirit. But that which is material has nothing to do with that which is spirit. Before you can grant somebody something, you yourself must ensure that you have it. Because you cannot grant somebody something which you yourself do not have, because you lack it. And because many lack that which is of spirit, they cannot mediate it. However, there is lots of that which is material, and that is what they give. That which is of material will pass away very quickly, but that which is of spirit endures forever. Therefore, the Christmas spirit should be that which endures, such as the examples that Christ himself gave: patience and understanding, everlasting love, and readiness to serve. That's but just a few. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Gregory. I want to talk about another, well, it's a famous thing. You know, Charles Dickens, he wrote a book called A Christmas Carol, and I know it's a fiction story, but it's based on, let's say, real conditions at his time. So if I can just give you a little bit outline of the story, and then Brother Rainer, if you can sort of give us a spiritual assessment of it. So I'm just going to say this part, read this out, and then so just in case people don't know what is this story of Christmas Carol in a very brief way. So basically, the main character in the story is called Scrooge. I think it's set in the 1830s or something. That's when Charles Dickens was alive. So so basically, there's a main character called Scrooge, who was elderly, miserly, greedy money lender, or cold as well. And basically, in this story, he was shown the consequences of his actions. So the story begins with that on a cold Christmas Eve, he declines an invitation from his nephew to come to a dinner, and also he comes across a couple of men who are collecting money, you could say, for charity, to give asking him for a donation for food and heating for the poor, and he just sends them away. And then also another thing, he has an employee who works, who's underpaid and overworked, and he grudgingly gives him the Christmas Day off because that's the custom, not because he wants to. And another part of the story, that we find out that he had a fiancée called Belle, and basically, when she discovered that he loved money more than her, she says she left him. So in the story, he meets some goat. Obviously, this is a fiction story, but he comes across some Christmas goats who show him what would have happened if he did not act the way he acted, and in fact, also if he did, and the consequences of what would be in the future for him if he continued to act the way he acted. So, for example, I'm going to jump this a little bit. He had basically he had a partner in his company as a moneylender who died 7 years before, and he appeared to him to say, look, three ghosts are going to come and see you to show you these consequences of what you have been doing. So obviously one of them was now showing him this lady that was his fiancée, Belle, and she was now happily married with children and so on, and you know, while he obviously lonely now, so he could see one of his actions that resulted in that. The other one was I could say when he neglected. This is now. I have to say I haven't done the full research, so I can't quite say this exactly accurate or not. But basically, you know, showing the lack of love to his fellow man, you know, and just because the only thing he really cared about was accumulating his money, and so he could never get what, like Brother Ryan has shared already. You know, you're not really enjoying anything. It's all earthly. You know, whatever is the mundane, that's all you, if I can use the word enjoy, that's what you experience. And yet, there's so much more when you interact with human beings, which is sharing, you know, love, kindness, and so on. So what I want to ask you, Brother Rhino, on this really, you know, this is meant to reflect the Christmas spirit, the time of Christmas. Would you say, I know this is earthly things that are being described here and not quite about Jesus himself, but would you say that story does bring out the Christmas spirit and of, in a way, how we should be acting, you know, and rather than focusing on our earthly sort of needs or earthly ideas that we have?
Well, unfortunately, I have not read the story of Scrooge, but I've read a few others like Oliver Twist and Great Expectations, and they're all wonderful novels. And of course, it's wrong to say what you just said. They describe only the earthly things. They describe much more. They are great help. For example, like you said already, it showed the consequences of your actions. So it showed the cause and effect relationship. That principle, what you sow, you will reap. You mentioned it yourself. He can see himself in the future. He's all a lonely, embittered man, has no friends because of his coldness and hardship and his whole concentration on accumulating material wealth. And of course, those poets, they described human weaknesses, and here it was the avarice, and there are many other poets who described that this avarice is unfortunate in its effects not only on others, like being inhuman to the other human beings, like you see it, for example, in Oliver Twist, or like the poor people dependent on you, but it's also very harmful on your own self, because the coldness, you become so cold and you live in a very cold, lonely world, and persons with a warm heart leave you. So that showing to the people what it means to have a warm heart and to act in love and understanding for the other human beings. This is exactly what Jesus meant, love thy neighbor as yourself. It's exemplified here as a person who does not love his neighbor as himself. He loves, in fact, no one, and he's only concentrated on accumulating some material wealth. There are concepts being exemplified, and that literature is very valuable, and that's why it's so fascinating to read those stories of all the writers in the 19th century, but Charles Dickens is especially. So no, this is not something material. One misunderstands this thing, what material means. It means it shows qualities of the heart And those qualities of the heart are generosity, are kindness to other human beings, and are warm-heartedness. That makes life beautiful, and that is really putting the spirit of Jesus into action. And although when they do not talk great theoretical things, abstract philosophical things, they describe in the most wonderful way, in great art, in stories almost as gripping as life, what happens if you act in certain ways, or how you should not act. So I think, no, Charles Dickens it's very spiritual in the end, and if people heeded his novels, which they did, of course, to some extent, and I think without Charles Dickens the world probably would look a poorer place, and that did a lot of good, and it opened people's eyes and showed them, do not act that way like Scrooge does, and try to get away from that and try to show kindness to your people working for you, to your employees, and to your wife. And that is also throughout his other novels, where he showed we must not maltreat the orphans, or people just like Oliver Twist, and really showed what terrible hardship those children lived, and how they were exploited by all kinds of people, and it really opened the eyes of society at the time. No, I think those novels are great achievements, great human achievements, and it takes a lot to be able to write such things. So they have my reverence, those writers of the 19th century, and there are some more. And they make the world a better place, and they show lots of things. They show a lot of things which bring people to change their ways, and that's really what all the things are about. What Jesus said, and love thy neighbor as yourself.
Thank you so much.
It's just that your neighbor is the one you're with. If you're an employer, the neighbor is the employee. If you meet someone knocking at your door and has no money, and desperately you give him something and you make him welcome in your home. And these are matters of the heart. It really says, look, there is not only the material things, the money and the material wealth, but there's also matters of the heart. And we know that the heart is just the spiritual, the voices of the heart, the emotions in the heart are spiritual movements, are the movements of your spirit. And it has been a fight all along to make people listen to the heart again. And that has been the great task of literature and art, to say there's something else than just the material and the monthly income. So I pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Brother Rainer, for sort of showing us, you could say, the importance of literature, because the storytelling, it's really, let's say, he was very popular, Charles Dickens, and you see that at Christmas, actually, his movie, this is a regular movie, The Christmas Carol. There's certain things they always repeat at Christmas time, and this is one of those movies. And of course, he was famous, like you said, with Oliver Twist, with similar story like that. So, and people obviously appreciated that. And also at that time, there was quite a bit of suffering like that, with obviously the poor people being neglected, and he was highlighting that too. I believe he had a similar story, not quite the same. He came from a middle class family, but somehow his dad, let's say, spent his money very unwisely and just threw it out, and somehow Charles Dickens had suddenly I'm not quite sure exactly what age that he had to sort of suddenly, get on his own feet and start to find a job, work for himself. And, so these stories were deep for him, in his personal life, as well as the story that he shared with us, the fiction, the stories that he created for us. So it's like a personal experience he went through. And so thank you for that, Brother Rainer. I'm going to bring another aspect to you now, Brother Gregory, forgiveness, because Jesus is all about love. Everybody knows this is the season of love. And so I'm going to ask you, is it, once we have Christmas, people get together and so on, and maybe they also reflect on what's been going on in their lives, and maybe, because people are coming together, and maybe there's some people that for some reason they've had a dispute with them, and they're not talking to them. Do you think this is a good occasion to, make up and ask for forgiveness and get together again and use this opportunity, to celebrate Christmas in that way? So that's to you, Brother Gregory.
Christmas, or the spirit of Christmas, is not bound to a specific period. The spirit of Christmas is genuine and always exists, for the personification of divine love gives and continue to give. Therefore, whoever wishes to celebrate Christmas continuously must embrace that spirit. To give doesn't mean to just offer material things. What is most important are the spiritual things. Which spiritual things help the individual to mature spiritually? So the squabbles which men have, which sort of distract them from that which is noble, only wastes the opportunities that they have been granted to mature. To wait for Christmas period before reconciling is a complete waste of time. For a man who wishes to mature must explore, must move forward, and therefore must strive to sever those ignoble threads that tend to hold it down. That personality will not wait for Christmas to come before severing all those ignoble threads, or start exchanging gifts, which gifts end up as material things, yet spiritually they remain very poor, or they harbor all sort of terrible thoughts. The spirit of Christmas has always remained spiritual. It has nothing to do with material things. It is the earthman who attaches so much importance to the material and ignores that which is most important, which is the spiritual. Therefore, man should understand first what the spirit of Christmas is before celebrating it. Else, it is a complete waste of time because they lack the necessary understanding.
Thank you for that, Brother Gregory. I want to go to you now, Brother Rainer, and I just want to ask you, should the people who are not Christians, or let's say of other religions, let's say, should they also celebrate Christmas? Because what we are finding, I know again it's a bit commercial, but if you go to these non-Christian countries now in the world, Middle East, and maybe even probably China as well, and other places, they're also now sort of, okay, they don't have the Christmas holiday necessarily, but they do some sort of, I could say, you even see Christmas trees there. So I know it's not officially the celebration like is it for certain countries, but they seem to somehow acknowledge it. And so I'm just asking: is it those who are of different faiths? So Christianity is in their basically in their faith. Is it good for them also to celebrate? And if so, how can they do that really? Because it's not really that's not their teaching. So how could they really celebrate?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, how can they really celebrate? For them, in order to do something, you must understand it. If you don't understand it, and you do not know what the Holy Night is about, and you have no inkling what the holiness of God means, then the outer things you do, they are just like Jeff. There's just tinkling brass. It's just nothing. They can do it. It's absolutely useless if they want to. It's meaningless. In order, you must strive in what you do to do something out of conviction. It might, if that's only a pretext for, I don't know, sitting next to a Christmas tree and having a Christmas goose or something, well, then it is just a party. But of course, what you do is, I think you must be very careful doing it, because in spite of everything, this thing is connected with Christ. And you should be aware, if you just take that as an opportunity to have a kind of Christmas dinner or Christmas party. It's just then a theme party, completely worthless. In the best case, it's completely worthless and hasn't got negative results with you. But probably it has results, but it's not my. I don't want to judge it if it's bad or good. It's definitely a worthless endeavor. But I think every human being must try to understand what Jesus Christ is about and come to a true understanding of what Christ has brought. That is the task. That comes as a consequence of striving toward the light, striving for spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is the maturity of us human beings. It's the acquisition of wisdom. And we have to understand those things Jesus told us, like we have to become like children. We have to know about what is meant. Why do we have to become like children? What is this childlikeness? And we have to change in that way. And we have to try to understand, if he's saying it is only through being newborn that you will reach the kingdom of heaven, we must understand, everyone who is serious about it, what is this actually? What does that mean, being born again, being newly born? It's definitely not just a second baptism or something. And there are lots of things like this. So trying to understand the spirit of Christmas doesn't mean it is understanding the holiness of God and God laws. That is the spirit of Christ, or that is Christ itself. And there is no way around Christ for whoever. There's only this one way which Christ showed, and it is the task, it's the obligation of every human being to come to an understanding of that. And so I pass it back to you. What's the time now? I just think I tried there are, perhaps one should mention it, there are books on the website for the Grail message, which describe also the life of Jesus Christ, and lots of things, also unknown things, and of the life of Jesus Christ. And they are wonderful to read, and you can get an understanding of what Christ was about, and what it means. You begin, it awakens something in your heart. There are excellent books, and I just like to point it out. They are all listed on this website. What is it again?
Yes.
Brother Saad?
The book, you're asking about the book itself?
The website.
Yes, the website you can get from grailmessage.com. That's
grailmessage.com, and there are books like Past Eras Awaken.
Yeah, the one for Jesus, there are two of them.
There are two of them.
Yes, one of them.
And one of them is really the unknown events from the life of Jesus, the Son of God.
Yes.
Can I just read something out, perhaps a little later on, from that thing, because it really gives you... but I'll do it right now, because it's not theoretical, and it shows Jesus, how it was at the time. A wonderful book, very uplifting.
Yes.
The ideal Christmas present,
okay,
if I may say so, and very spiritual. This is...
if you tell us which book you're reading from, tell us which book you're reading from. And
I'm reading from Past Eras Awaken, and it's unknown events from the life of Jesus, the Son of God. And it's just the very first thing. He has just been baptized by John the Baptist, and has recognized his task here on earth. He knows who he is, and he knows what he has to do. And he's wandering around. He has just been for a long period on his own in the desert, which is described in the Bible in a very few words. And he's now coming out of the desert. And so it's right in the beginning of the few years he was actually on earth, and could try to give the knowledge to human beings. But he had no disciples yet, and he was trying to find the disciples. So this is now here. A beautiful summer day was drawing to a close. The slanting rays of the sun touched the lucid surface of the lake, turning everything to gold. Deep in thought, a wanderer strode along the country road. His right hand held a long staff. His left hung loosely at his side. All his movements were natural and dignified. His feet scarcely left any prints in the dust of the road. Bleating, a flock of sheep approached him, guarded by two sturdy dogs. The shepherds followed them wearily. The wanderer stepped aside to make way for the animals. His gaze rested upon them kindly. They seemed to sense his goodness, for one after the other came and nestled against him. Some lambs remained standing at his side, gently stroked their woolly heads with his beautifully shaped hand, and lifted the smallest onto his arm. The shepherd had reached him, greeting and scrutinizing the wanderer inquisitively. "Do you like animals so much, stranger?" he asked, surprised. "My sheep are normally shy. Are you perchance also a shepherd?" "Maybe I shall be one some day," the wanderer smiled, carefully setting the animal back on the ground. Only now did the shepherd see how young the wanderer was. From afar he had taken him for an older, mature man. The lean face was distinguished by harmonious, noble features. His hair and beard were well groomed, but looked as if they had not been cut for a long time. Perhaps he had made a vow not been cut for a long time because he came from the desert. "What is the name of the place over there by the lake?" asked the young man. "Tiberias." Thanking him pleasantly, the wanderer took his leave and made briskly for the village. Children were playing by the lake, but hardly looked up as he approached. They were accustomed to strangers. He stopped and watched them at play without attracting their notice. The boys had dug small shallow pits in the sand and were trying to scoop water into them. "Lend me your staff," one of them suddenly addressed the onlooker. "I want to run a channel to the lake with it." Willingly the young man handed the staff to the child. Amused, he advised the little fellow at the same time, however, that the water would never ever flow upwards. This the boy understood, but he was not satisfied. "I will pray to God to change the direction of the water," he said importantly. "I am the son of a priest, so God will surely grant my plea." "Child, how can you say such a thing?" the wanderer exclaimed in alarm. "Do you imagine that God would overturn his eternal laws for the sake of a game?" "It's not just for a game," the child argued obstinately, "but to show his power. If he's almighty, he has to do it." "Like father, like son," the man sighed, but then said in a good-natured way to the boy who was looking up at him crossly, "God is so sublime that he has no need to demonstrate his power to human beings. It would be well known to them if they would believe." "You are right, stranger," a voice was heard to say. A woman had joined them unnoticed and had overheard the last sentences. "It's wrong of you, Benjamin, to say such things," she rebuked the boy, who reached for her skirt and snuggled up to her with a half remorseful, half startled, "Mother!" "You must not hold his words against the foolish child," said the woman. "You're on a journey. How much further do you intend to walk today?" "Only as far as that village, if I find any lodging there," the man answered cheerfully. "Come with me to our house. My husband, the priest, will make you forget the boy's immature talk." The woman spoke in a lively tone. It was obvious that she was happy to be able to give something. The traveler thanked her. Together the three of them set out on the narrow path leading to the western row of the houses. Tiberias was a small fishing town. Boats lay on the shore, boats rocked on the lake. Fishermen were busy taking down the dried nets in order to cast them into the lake for the night. That seemed to please the stranger, who had probably never seen anything like it before. In a friendly way he asked the boy about this and that, and the child lost his shyness and responded. They came to a clean house with a small garden. "How lovely," said the guest as he bent over the bright flowers. "We also have a garden like this at home." "Where's your home?" the woman inquired. "In Nazareth. I'm Jesus, the eldest son of Joseph the carpenter." "Please enter, Jesus. We hope you like it here. My husband's out and will not come home until later." She brought the guest milk, bread and fish, and prepared a bed for the night for the weary man. The following day the priest and his guests walked up and down the garden in lively conversation. "You must have had good teachers, Jesus," said Gideon. You appear to be well informed about everything, and I have no intention of taking up a position somewhere as a temple servant. He looked at Jesus as though expecting him to acquiesce or give further explanation. But there was no answer. Then he resumed, "What are you planning to do in the immediate future?" While Jesus evidently groped for words to make his intention clear to his host, the latter continued, "It's not curiosity that prompts me to ask this question, Jesus. I like you, and an assistant would be of great help to me at work. I wanted to invite you to remain with me for remuneration. You need not decide at once. Tomorrow there's particularly much to do. If you were to help me, you could at the same time become acquainted with the nature of the work. Well, what do you think?" Gideon spoke with great kind-heartedness. Jesus perceived this. Therefore he agreed to help the priest in the days to come. Perhaps you could find here the beginning of the task that was henceforth to fill his life. The priest was called to the house, but Jesus stayed in the garden, pondering his words. In the solitude of the wilderness, he had gained certainty about his identity and about his Father's purpose in sending him to the earth. He knew that he was to bring mankind the truth which had been lost, the buried knowledge about God, in order to save them from destruction. But how was he to approach human beings? How had John done it? This is John the Baptist. How had John done it? Should he go and ask him? He had reflected on it many times, but always he had reached the conclusion that he could not follow the same path as John. A child's laughter interrupted his thoughts. Benjamin was coming towards him from the street with a young, ungainly dog. Both landed panting beside the thoughtful guest, who greeted them warmly. Shortly afterwards they were joined by the boy's mother. She was on her way to visit a sick woman and invited Jesus to accompany her. He agreed gladly, although Benjamin asked him to remain in the garden and finish the wonderful story he had begun in the morning. On the way, Rachel, the wife of the priest, told him about the sick woman. She was a widow who for a year had supported herself and her 7 young children through the work of her hands. Now she lay in bed with a high fever, and there was no hope of recovery. If only she could sleep. The doctor feels that it would help her, concluded the woman with a sigh. They entered a low hut, which looked somewhat neglected because of the woman's prolonged illness. Emaciated and burning with fever, the woman was tossing to and fro. Her eyes were smarting. She looked penetratingly at the visitor. "Who's that?" she asked abruptly. "Our guest," Rachel replied kindly. "He's a learned rabbi." "Sir," cried the sick woman, if you are so learned, then tell me, where do I find God's goodness in my illness? Even now my house and home are going to rack and ruin. If I must die, the children will be helpless and unprotected." Sobbing cut off the remaining words. Jesus had stepped quietly to her bedside. "Woman," he answered in a soft voice, "God is justice. Try to remember." Is there not something in your life that you have done wrong? Have you not at some time or other deserved God's punishment? Why do you ask such a question? You know that it is so. How do you, a stranger, know? Gasping, the woman blurted out the questions. I know that it simply cannot be otherwise. But now let me ask, do you regret having behaved in that way? Will you always strive to live according to God's commandments? The sick woman's wide open eyes were fastened upon Jesus. I can scarcely go on. So heavily does remorse weigh upon me. I will certainly never do anything like that again. Then know that God forgives you, for He is not only justice, He is also goodness and compassion. Go to sleep, and in your sleep receive the strength you need to continue your journey. As he spoke, Jesus had laid his right hand on the forehead and eyes of the sick woman. When he withdrew it after a few moments, the woman was breathing calmly, her eyelids closed. Amazed, Rachel looked upon the tranquil scene. Both left the hut quietly. But no sooner were they out of earshot than Rachel burst out, "Sir, who are you to bring about such a thing? How can you speak with certainty? You speak as though you know God." "Do you know him, Rachel?" asked Jesus in reply. "Have not the prophets written of him? You shall make no image of him, because it would only profane what is divine. But in spirit you may envisage him." "Sir, you are different from all the human beings I know. It's good that you will stay with us, so that we can learn from you." The next day the whole of Tiberias was full of the news that the widow had recovered after the stranger from Nazareth had visited her. Gideon felt uncomfortable. That is the priest. He was a man who liked to avoid attracting attention. Now his house had become the center of great excitement because of the guest. How fortunate that Jesus had not consented to become his assistant. For some days they would have to endure the onrush of inquisitive persons, of those seeking help. Then Gideon intended to relapse into his accustomed peace. But first he asked his guest, "Jesus, tell me, how were you able to heal the woman? How could you know that something was oppressing her? How could you promise her God's forgiveness?" These are many questions all at once. I will also try to answer them all at once, said Jesus. You see, Gideon, when a person is so badly shaken during an illness, it's a sign that he cannot come to terms with his conscience. This I perceived also with the ailing woman. If I were to help her, I first had to help her soul find peace. God's forgiveness, however, is the certainty for all sinners who truly repent. It sounds so simple the way you say it, Gideon declared thoughtfully. Yet I must ask another question. In whose power did you lay your hand on, causing her to sleep? In the power of God, the Lord, Jesus answered quite simply. But something about the manner in which he uttered the words caused the other to fall silent. Jesus stayed 2 more days in the house of the priest. Then he departed with thanks and continued his journey along the lake. He was glad that a start had been made. Already men and women approached him to ask his advice. They considered that a person who had helped once could and would continue to do so. And they were not mistaken. Questions not prompted by idle curiosity were answered. But in Gideon's house yawned an emptiness that no one would acknowledge. It was as though all warmth and all sunshine had gone with Jesus. What might be the cause? The priest wondered. He should have tried after all to retain the guest. So here is where I want to stop, and I think these are my parting words. When you let Jesus into your life, you will have warmth and sunshine. And when Jesus left Gideon's house, it was really this, but in Gideon's house yawned an emptiness that no one would acknowledge. It was as though all warmth and all sunshine had gone with Jesus. What might be the cause? The priest wondered. He should have tried after all to retain the guest. And that's really, this describes in a way also the situation with us. We are in a state of emptiness now, all human beings here. And all warmth and all sunshine has left our lives. I mean now humanity in general. And we have to try to get the Spirit of Jesus back to live again in the warmth and the sunshine. And I pass it back now to Brother Saad.
Thank you so much, Brother Rainer, for reading this from the book From Past Years Awaken, about the unknown facts of Jesus, which you can get from this website, which is www.grailmessage.com. I'll just spell it, www.grail, G-R-A-I-L, message, MESSAGE.com. And of course the Grail message, obviously you can also get it from that website too. And that is the aim of our show, to introduce you to the knowledge of the Grail message. So this is a beautiful writing that Brother Rainer was reading about, let's say, part of the story of Jesus. As you've said, Brother Rainer, we've come towards the end of our show tonight. Hopefully we've got Brother Siam is on his way. Now next Tuesday is actually Christmas Day. So are you happy to be with us, Brother Rainer and Brother Gregory? Just checking.
Well, I'm here, but I hope Greg will be here too.
Yes, I'm going. Are you there, Brother Gregory? Are you available for next Christmas Tuesday as well?
I'm available, but
Yeah.
I wonder what the audience will be.
That's
if the audience will not be somewhere else.
Right. Okay.
Oh yeah, I think we have to take that into consideration.
All
and
right.
yeah, I think I have really to check with my wife. We might be invited.
Okay. I know it's a difficult one. It's the first time. It'll be 3 years. Well, next year it'll be 3 years on this show. So we've never had to do it on a Christmas Day before. So okay. So in that case, let's not go ahead with the show.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's better.
We've done, in a way, we've celebrated Christmas today through what we've discussed tonight. And so what I'll say now, then we will be back on New Year's Day, which is also on Tuesday, the 1st of January. It's actually New Year's Day. It's always a week, also a week away from Christmas Day. So we'll be back on that day with a new show, a new topic. It's New Year, New Beginnings. Obviously very appropriate. New Year, new beginnings. That's the topic for that Tuesday, the 1st of January. So what I would like to say from my side is thank you, listeners, for being with us. I really wish you a great Christmas. And I'm going to ask my colleagues to say their few words as well. Brother Gregory, what would you like to say to our listeners?
Wishing everyone a beautiful Christmas in the Christmas spirit.
Thank you. And Brother Rainer, anything you'd like to say?
No, I just would like the same as Brother Greg said.
Yes.
And then goodbye till January the 1st.
January the 1st, 2 weeks' time. So thank you, listeners, for being with us. Just again to remind you, we'll be back on Tuesday, the 1st of January. And I just all wish everybody a great Christmas. And please celebrate in the spirit of Christmas, because that's what it's meant to be. Hopefully today we've shared that with you, how it's meant to be. So thank you again. And look forward to seeing Brother Siom any minute now to continue the rest of the evening. So yes, have a great week every 2 weeks ahead. All the best. So
Bye-bye, Brother Saad. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.